Hey guys, what is up? Swim here, and I'm going to real quick break down for you the number one thing you need to understand with Runeterra. This is a card game fundamental, and I've talked about it before, but I'm going to break it down here in a way that's going to be really straightforward and easy to understand. So the number one thing you need to do in Legends of Runeterra, and I'll show you some examples of this, is you need to understand when you need to play fast and when you need to play slow, and what exactly that means. Again, I promise this is the number one thing that's going to help you win more games overnight. So if you're able to adjust the way you think to these terms. So playing fast basically means you're playing for two resources. You're playing for mana efficiency, and you're playing for opponent nexus health getting lowered, of course. Playing slow means you're playing for also two resources. Card advantage as a resource, as opposed to mana, like having more cards in hand and getting more value per card, as well as your own nexus health being higher, right? And the nexus health part is very important as well. Now, what I like to say is that in general, you want to either be in a position where your strategy is playing a lot faster than the opponents or a little bit slower. The reason for this is actually pretty simple, and it's the same you might have heard, like, who's the beatdown in some other card games. But the reason for this is just because nexus health is a resource. So if you're playing a lot faster than your opponent, you'll be able to maybe kill them before their key cards come online. Whereas if you're playing a little slower than the opponent, they'll deal some damage to your nexus, but you'll be able to have more value at the end of it without dying, right? But, the danger zone, if your strategy right now is a little bit faster than the opponent's, well, that's going to be really bad, of course, because you'll deal some nexus damage, but they'll survive and they'll outvalue you. And if you play a lot slower than your opponent, the same thing, you will probably die before you come online. So again, you want to be a lot faster or a little slower. This is pretty much represented in the typical rock, paper, scissors triangle of card games, which is mid-range tends to be aggro, control tends to be mid-range, and aggro tends to be control. This is a broad rule of thumb, and there are some examples, but in general, the reason for this triangle is exactly what I'm saying, a lot faster or a little slower. So what does this actually mean for you? Well, it's very important to understand how fast the opponent's deck is playing. If you're looking, before you're thinking about mulliganing, if you see Noxus is typically a very fast color, although, sometimes you can run it as a control support color if it's like paired with Heimerdinger, or maybe Ashe can use Noxus to slow down the game a little bit. Piltover and Zaun is very flexible. It has like a really good control slow package with like Heimerdinger Ezreal, but a very fast package in terms of, Jinx and all of the just like aggro face discard strategies, right? Ionia is mostly aggro with a little bit of control tendencies. If they're paired with Shadow Isles, they can definitely be a control deck, but most of their, value tools will be playing very fast and very cheap, a lot of elusives that will try to burn you down very quickly. Demacia is almost quintessential mid-range. Demacia is like, they're not fast enough to be aggro, and they don't really have good slow options either. They're just like the idea of just like middle of the field, play for the board, play for like value exchanges, and don't go too far in either direction. They're very balanced in that regard. And Shadow Isles tends to be pretty control-y, although they do have some aggro options. Most of Shadow Isles, when you see it paired with like Freljord, that's going to be control. When you see it paired with, like PNZ, that's pretty much going to be control. But, when you see it paired with something like Noxus, Elise is a very aggressive hero. That's going to be a fast deck. That's going to be aggro, right? And then lastly, we've got Freljord, which tends to be mid-range or control. They're kind of like a slower deck. They play for like long-term potential. They have a lot of like heavy things, stuff that snowballs late game, but they've also got some like just solid like middle of the field tools. Cards like Omenhawk, cards like Avarosen, Hearthguard are fine. They come online fairly early, and a lot of the Frostbite package is not really super slow either. So right at the start of the game, look at your opponent's colors and their champions, look at your colors and your champions, and ask yourself, who's faster, who's slower in this relationship, right? Whose side is time on? Who needs to like go fast to be able to win the game, right? And what should they do exactly, right? So if you're playing, let's say, a mid-range strategy against a control strategy, so let's say I'm playing Demacia, and I'm, again, quintessential mid-range, like I'm not too fast and I'm not too slow, and then we hit a Shadow Isles Freljord list, right, running like no champions or just Tryndamere, that's a really, really slow list. You know, Anivia would also be something super slow, like heavy things, stuff that's going to take a while to come online. So I'm faced with a decision, starting at the Mulligan screen, but it's going to be a decision that is going to be potentially changing as the game goes through, and depending on how we read their hand and how our hand plays out, which is, do I try to speed up my strategy? Do I mulligan for like early game aggressive cards and try to win early, or do I try to slow down my strategy? Do I try to maybe slow down a bit, mulligan for more cards that are going to give long-term value? These are going to be draw cards, Vanguard Redeemer. These are going to be expensive mana cards. You look at a draw card as something that just costs a lot of mana. Like, you play it over 2 turns and it will cost you a lot of net mana, because the value of a card that draws you another card like Shadow Assassin is, of course, when you play the second card, right? So these are going to be very, very slow to get value. And this is really where it's going to depend on your deck, your hand, and your situation, right? There's a lot you have to think about, and your strategy is going to be flexible. It's not just going to be, oh, in this matchup, let's play this way. A lot of it does depend on your hand, okay? So let's go ahead and show some examples of this playing out. So take a look at this game right here. We're playing effectively like a Fiora, like combo style deck. And we queue into Prismaticism, who is playing Freljord and PNZ. This is like a, you know, he has Ezreal, so it's going to be like Frostbite. It's going to be slow and grindy, and most importantly, as any good slow deck will do, it's basically going to stop you from trying to win too fast, right? Now, sometimes you can be like, okay, my best bet is to go fast and outrace them, and some of it depends on your opening hand, but most of it will depend on your deck. So we have Shadow Assassin, Double Fiora, and Emerald Awakener in our hand, and basically the idea here is, okay, he's going to be slowly grinding us down. What do we want to keep? Well, in this case, do we want to try to rush him down, or do we want to try to play for kind of like long term and see where that gets us? Do we want to try to outvalue him and slow our strategy down instead? And we actually elect, because we've queued into this matchup 3 times already in this day, and we've lost. It's a really, really favored matchup for Prismaticism on the slow deck, because Frostbite slaps Fiora combo decks. So we elect to try to slow it down. Basically, I'm saying with this call, I don't think my deck can like rush fast enough. It's not a kind of deck that can make itself go fast enough to get under you. So I'm going to try to slow myself down, hope you haven't drawn like multiple progress days, and I'm going to try to outvalue you instead. So here I mulligan Emerald Awakener, because he doesn't put early pressure. I won't need the lifesteal, but we're going to keep Shadow Assassin and the Fioras, because Shadow Assassin is a draw card. Really great for both conditions, actually, because it's elusive as well. And Fiora will kind of force removal on his end, allowing us to get like more long-term value. But then on turn 5, something really big changes. We've drawn the second Shadow Assassin at this point. Opponent's down to 17. He's letting in some chip damage, and he goes for an Avalanche that we actually have the deny option for. So this actually presents a really, really interesting opportunity. If we go for the deny here, we can force out, you know, a lot of pressure tools, see how he responds. And if he actually can't really deal with these elusives, we might be looking to speed our strategy up. We also have a few damage tools in hands. These are going to be, of course, the reposts that we are going to be able to play to give 3 damage to the Shadow Assassins if we need to push a little bit more. You know, after like the Brittle Steels and the Harsh Winds comes down, we can still get some damage. So suddenly, I'm looking at this situation, and also he hasn't played a lot of like early game cards either, so that's showing that his hand is probably slow. He's more likely on the stuff like Progress Day, True Shot Barrage. So, you know, suddenly I'm thinking to myself, okay, even though he's a slow deck and my deck can't go faster than him, well, I've drawn a pretty fast hand. This is like as fast as you know, I can draw double Shadow Assassin, and most importantly, he's drawn a pretty slow hand. He's actually representing, he doesn't have like Mystic Shot. He could have killed the Shadow Assassin, but you know, he didn't, which is really, really big. He is like bricking his mana, so he's probably on like True Shot Barrage or Progress Day. That's not a good hand. We can't outlast that kind of thing. So suddenly, let's actually change our strategy. Let's go aggressive and try to go under him instead of going over him, right? If that makes sense. So just think in these terms exactly, you know, think in terms of fast, think in terms of slow, think in terms of, you know, I mean, matchup counters will matter, but this is like the #1 thing to think about, right? So when you go into a game, identify, you know, whether you should think about playing faster or think about playing slower, and then be flexible depending on how the hands play out as well. Because while a certain deck might be a slow deck, it can draw like a medium paced hand. And, you know, a fast deck can also draw like a medium paced hand, right? Like the deck is a generalization and the hand state is what is actually happening in that game, right? And just as another example, very, very common state is going to be mirror matches. So mirror matches, of course, if you're playing the same deck or a very similar archetype as your opponent, maybe a few cards are different, but you're playing kind of the same general strategy. You're both playing at the same speed, which means that pretty much always in mirror matches, with rare exception, you probably want to look to slow your strategy down. Again, this is going to be mulliganing for like later game tools, right? And you can do this to excessive degrees. So outside of mirror matches, for example, sometimes against a control deck, if they're running like really slow tools, you know, we'll be keeping cards like Ladros and Captain Thrawn in our opening hand, like in the mulligan. We would keep sometimes like an 8-mana card in our opening hand. Absolutely, 100%. Like we would think about it, and you know, if it's like a Freljord Shadow Isles, like the slowest of the slow decks, we can punish them by keeping those kinds of things in hand. But in terms of mirror matches, you also want to slow down a little bit in that regard. So keep, you know, a lot more of the cards. Draw cards are going to be good. Glimpse Beyond, Vanguard Redeemer, you know, you're pretty much always keeping Avros and Sentry, like no matter what. But your draw cards are going to be premium. You're going to change the way you play as well. Navori Conspirator, I'm going to use Elusive Mirrors as an example because they're all over the ladder right now. But, you know, if you've got Navori Conspirator, you know, let's say you draw it on like turn 4 or turn 5 in the mirror match, you could use it on you know, Inspiring Mentor like you normally do, but you know, look at the board state, look at how things are playing out and think to yourself, do I want to slow this down? Do I want to instead use my Navori Conspirator on a Shadow Assassin so that I get an extra draw? This is much less mana efficient, but much more card advantage efficient. And again, mana is the fast resource, card advantage is the slow resource. Okay, keep that in mind. So these are the kind of things you need to think about, and if you think in these terms, you will become a much better player overnight, I promise. All right, guys, that's going to be it for me, and I'll see you guys next time.